The first shot rang out as Winifred Barrett caught a glimpse of her father's cruel smile in the dying light of the Texas sunset. "You'll be married by sunrise, girl," Baron Thaddeus Barrett sneered, his voice cutting through the warm summer air of 1875. "I've had enough of your willfulness and your—" His eyes raked over her figure with disgust, appetite. Winifred stood frozen on the porch of the sprawling Barrett ranch house. At 22, she'd long endured her father's cutting remarks about her fuller figure, but this was different. The cruelty in his eyes held finality. "Father, please," she whispered, clutching her hands to her chest. "Who would you even—" "Jeremiah Dolan," he interrupted, satisfaction evident in his voice. Winifred's blood ran cold. Jeremiah Dolan was the town drunk, a man 30 years her senior with a violent temper that only worsened with whiskey. She'd seen him stumbling from the saloon in Cottonwood Springs more times than she could count, had heard the stories of his cruelty from the saloon girls who bore the bruises to prove it. "You cannot be serious," she breathed. Baron Barrett adjusted his fine waistcoat, the gold chain of his pocket watch glinting in the fading light. "I've never been more serious, girl. You've been nothing but a burden since your mother died. No man of proper standing would have you, but Dolan's desperate enough for the small parcel of land I've offered as your dowry." Tears threatened to spill down Winifred's cheeks, but she blinked them back. Crying only ever made her father angrier. "And if I refuse?" His laugh was cold and sharp. "You have nowhere to go, no money of your own. You'll do as I say, or find yourself on the streets by nightfall." In the distance, the sound of approaching horses broke the tense silence. Baron Barrett smiled. "That'll be him now. Go make yourself presentable, though I doubt it'll make much difference." Winifred retreated into the house, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the parlor window, she watched as Jeremiah Dolan dismounted, stumbling slightly. Even from a distance, she could see he was already deep in his cups. Her father greeted him with a handshake, and the two men laughed together like old friends. Desperation clawed at her throat. She ran to her room, pulling open drawers, searching for anything of value she could take with her. The pearl hairpin that had belonged to her mother, a small leather pouch containing a few dollars she'd managed to save from selling her embroidery in town. It wasn't much, but perhaps it would be enough to get her to her cousin's home in Colorado. As she stuffed these meager possessions into a small cloth bag, heavy footsteps approached her door. She whirled around as it burst open, revealing her father and Jeremiah Dolan. "There she is," Baron Barrett said, his hand clamped firmly on Dolan's shoulder. As promised, Jeremiah Dolan's bloodshot eyes traveled slowly over Winifred, making her skin crawl. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "She's a big one, ain't she? Well, more to love, I suppose." He laughed at his own joke, and Baron Barrett joined in. "The preacher will be here at dawn," her father announced. "Until then, Jeremiah will be staying in the guest room. And you," he pointed at Winifred, "will be locked in here to ensure there are no complications." As they left, Winifred heard the devastating click of a key turning in the lock. She ran to the window, throwing it open. It was a long drop to the ground below, but there was a trellis that might hold her weight. If she could just reach the stables, she could take her mare and flee before anyone noticed. Night had fallen fully now, the moon casting silver light across the ranch yard. In the distance, a figure on horseback approached, moving slowly along the main road. Winifred squinted, trying to make out who it might be at this late hour. The rider stopped at the edge of the property, seemingly surveying the Barrett house. Then, with purpose, he directed his horse toward the stables. Winifred felt a flicker of hope. A stranger at this hour could mean distraction, perhaps even help. She gathered her skirts and began the precarious climb down the trellis, praying it would hold her weight. Each crack of the wood beneath her sent her heart racing, but determination drove her forward. When her feet finally touched the ground, she pressed herself against the wall of the house, listening for any sign that she'd been discovered. Hearing nothing but the night sounds of the ranch, she crept toward the stables, keeping to the shadows. As she neared the stable doors, the sound of low voices reached her ears. She paused, straining to hear. "Be staying the night?" That was Samuel, their stable hand. "Just need to rest my horse," came a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Been riding hard from Laramie." "Well, you're welcome to a spot in the hayloft, mister. But I should warn you, there's to be a wedding here tomorrow. Barron's daughter and Jeremiah Dolan." There was a pause. "Dolan? The drunk from town." "The very same." "And the daughter?" "She's willing." Samuel's laugh was bitter. The Baron doesn't much care for what his daughter wants or doesn't want. Winifred stepped forward then, into the dim light of the stable lantern. Both men turned to look at her, Samuel with shock, and the stranger with quiet assessment. "Miss Barrett," Samuel exclaimed. "You shouldn't be out here." "I'm leaving, Samuel," she said firmly. "And I need Swift." The stranger stepped forward then, and Winifred got her first clear look at him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through her. His clothes were trail-worn but decent, a blue shirt, dark vest, and denim pants. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and a Stetson was pushed back on his head. "You're running," he stated simply. Winifred lifted her chin. "I'd rather take my chances in the wilderness than be Jeremiah Dolan's wife." The stranger nodded slowly, then turned to Samuel. "How long before they notice she's gone?" "Morning probably," Samuel replied, already moving to saddle Winifred's mare. The Baron locked her in her room for the night. The stranger's jaw tightened. "And this Dolan character? He's in the house now." "Guest room," Winifred supplied. "He's drunk as usual." Something dangerous flickered in the stranger's eyes. He extended his hand to Winifred. "Name's Kieran Lawson. I was passing through on my way north, but it seems like fate had other plans." Winifred hesitantly took his hand. "Winifred Barrett." "Well, Miss Barrett," Kieran said, releasing her hand, "I don't make a habit of interfering in family matters, but I've had the misfortune of crossing paths with Jeremiah Dolan before. No woman deserves that fate." A noise from outside the stable made them all freeze. Footsteps approached, accompanied by slurred singing. "It's Dolan," Samuel whispered urgently. Kieran moved quickly, positioning himself between Winifred and the stable entrance. "Stay behind me," he murmured to her. The stable doors creaked open, and Jeremiah Dolan stumbled in, a bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand. He squinted into the dim light, his gaze finally landing on Winifred. "There's my pretty bride," he slurred, taking an unsteady step forward. "Thought I'd come see what I'm getting in the morning." Kieran stepped forward, his stance casual, but his hand resting near his pistol. "Evening, Dolan." Jeremiah blinked in confusion. "Who the hell are you?" "An old friend of Miss Barrett's," Kieran replied smoothly. "Just stopped by to offer my congratulations on your upcoming nuptials." Dolan's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Don't recall the Baron mentioning any friends coming by." "That's because he doesn't know I'm here," Kieran said, taking another step forward. "I'm afraid I have to tell you there won't be a wedding tomorrow." Dolan's face contorted with anger. "The hell there won't. I paid good money for that girl." "She's not for sale," Kieran said, his voice hardening. "And she's certainly not marrying you." Dolan lunged forward, raising the whiskey bottle like a club. Kieran moved with surprising speed, catching Dolan's wrist and twisting until the bottle fell from his grasp. With a swift movement, he pushed Dolan back against the stable wall, pinning him there with one forearm across his throat. "Listen carefully," Kieran said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're going to walk out of here, go back to town, and forget all about Winifred Barrett. If I ever hear you came looking for her, I'll find you. And next time, I won't be so gentle. Understand?" Dolan's eyes bulged, but he managed a nod. Kieran released him, and Dolan stumbled back, gasping for air. You'll regret this, Dolan wheezed. The Baron won't take kindly to someone stealing what's his. She doesn't belong to anyone, Kieran said firmly. Now get going. Dolan cast one last hateful glance at Winifred before stumbling out of the stable and into the night. Kieran turned to Winifred, his expression softening. We don't have much time. Once he sobers up enough to tell your father what happened, they'll come looking for you. I have family in Colorado, Winifred said, her voice shaking slightly. I was planning to go there. Kieran nodded. I know a safer route than the main roads. I'll take you. Why would you help me? Winifred asked, wariness creeping into her voice. You don't even know me. A shadow passed over Kieran's face. Let's just say I've seen what happens when women are treated like property. I couldn't live with myself if I rode away and left you to that fate. Samuel finished saddling Swift and brought the mare over to Winifred. I've packed some supplies in the saddlebags, he told her. Food, water, and a blanket. It's not much, but it should help. Winifred reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Samuel, for everything. As Kieran helped Winifred mount her horse, the sound of a gunshot split the night. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. That came from the house, Samuel said, his face pale in the lantern light. We need to go. Now. Kieran swung up onto his own horse, a powerful bay stallion. Stay close to me, he instructed Winifred. They rode out of the stable yard at a gallop, taking the back trail that led away from the main road. Behind them, lights were coming on in the Barrett house, and shouts could be heard. What do you think happened? Winifred called to Kieran as they rode. Nothing good, he replied grimly. But we can't go back to find out. They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Barrett ranch. Kieran led them off the established trails, taking routes that would be difficult to follow. As dawn began to break, they finally stopped in a small grove of cottonwood trees beside a stream. We'll rest here for a bit, Kieran said, dismounting and helping Winifred down from her mare. The horses need water, and we should eat something. Winifred sank gratefully onto a fallen log, her muscles aching from the long ride. She'd never been on horseback for so many hours at a stretch. As Kieran tended to the horses, she watched him surreptitiously, trying to understand this man who had so suddenly inserted himself into her life. He moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years spent outdoors, taking care of himself. When he caught her watching, he offered a small smile that transformed his serious face, making him look younger. Hungry? He asked, bringing over a package of jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Starving, she admitted, accepting the food gratefully. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Winifred's curiosity got the better of her. You said you'd encountered Jeremiah Dolan before. How? Kieran's expression darkened. 2 years ago, in a town called Silverton. He was married to a woman named Mary. Sweet woman, kind to everyone. He beat her so badly one night, she lost the baby she was carrying. He paused, his jaw tight. She died 3 days later. Winifred gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's horrible. Was he punished? He fled before the law could catch up to him. I was passing through when it happened. I helped with the search, but he'd vanished. Kieran met her eyes. When I heard your stable hand say his name, I knew I couldn't let history repeat itself. Thank you, Winifred said softly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Don't thank me yet, Kieran replied. We're not in the clear. Your father doesn't strike me as the type to let things go easily. No, she agreed grimly. He's not. After resting for an hour, they continued their journey, riding at a more moderate pace to preserve the horse's strength. Kieran was a quiet companion, but not uncomfortably so. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often kind, asking about her life at the ranch, her interests, her dreams for the future. Winifred found herself telling him things she'd never shared with anyone, how she'd taught herself to read from her mother's books after being denied formal schooling, how she'd always longed to see the mountains and forests beyond the Texas plains, how she'd endured her father's cruelty after her mother died when she was 12. He wasn't always so harsh, she explained as they rode side by side through a shallow valley. After my mother passed, something in him changed. He became obsessed with the ranch, with expanding his holdings. And I was just in the way. That's no excuse for how he treated you, Kieran said firmly. No, she agreed. But understanding it helps somehow. As evening approached on their second day of travel, Kieran tensed suddenly, reining in his horse. Winifred followed suit, watching as he scanned the terrain behind them. What is it? She whispered. Riders, he said grimly. 3, maybe 4. Moving fast. Winifred's heart sank. My father? Likely. We need to find cover. They urged their horses forward at a gallop, searching for anywhere that might provide protection. The land ahead was mostly open, with sparse vegetation offering little concealment. There. Kieran pointed to a rocky outcropping in the distance. If we can reach those rocks, we might have a chance. They rode hard, the sound of pursuing hoofbeats growing louder behind them. Just as they reached the rocks, a shot rang out, the bullet whistling past Winifred's ear. Get down, Kieran shouted, pulling her from her horse and behind a large boulder. The horses, trained not to bolt at gunfire, stayed nearby, partially concealed by the rocks. Kieran drew his pistol, peering carefully around the edge of the boulder. 4 riders, he confirmed. Your father's in the lead. Another shot struck the rock near Kieran's head, sending stone fragments flying. He ducked back, his expression grim. Kieran, Winifred's voice shook slightly. I don't want you to die, because of me. Nobody's dying today if I can help it, he replied, checking his ammunition. Stay low. He waited for a pause in the shooting, then leaned out and fired 2 quick shots. A shout told them he'd hit something, though not necessarily a person. Baron Barrett. Kieran called out. We don't want bloodshed. Turn back now. You stole my daughter, you thieving bastard, came the Baron's enraged reply. And you killed Jeremiah Dolan. Winifred gasped, looking at Kieran with wide eyes. You didn't, no, he said firmly. I left him alive at your ranch. Liar, the Baron shouted. We found him with a bullet in his chest. Return my daughter now, or I'll see you hang for murder. Kieran's face hardened. Someone's setting us up, he murmured to Winifred. Then, raising his voice again. I didn't kill anyone, Barrett. And your daughter came with me willingly to escape a forced marriage to a known wife-beater. There was a pause, then the sound of the men conferring among themselves. Finally, the Baron called out again. Winifred, show yourself, girl. Kieran shook his head sharply, but Winifred placed a hand on his arm. I need to face him, she said softly, or this will never end. Before he could stop her, she stood up from behind the boulder, keeping her hands visible. I'm here, father. You're coming home right now, Baron Barrett shouted. This man is a murderer. He's not. Winifred called back. Kieran Lawson never harmed Jeremiah Dolan. He only told him to leave me alone. We have witnesses who say otherwise, her father replied. Now come here before I lose my patience. Winifred glanced down at Kieran, who had risen to stand beside her, his gun held ready but pointed downward. He's lying, Kieran said quietly. Think about it. Who benefits from Dolan's death? Realization dawned on Winifred's face. He does, she whispered. The land he promised as my dowry, he gets to keep it now. Kieran nodded grimly. And he gets a convenient scapegoat. Winifred turned back to face her father. I'm not coming back, she called. Ever. You can keep your ranch and your land and your cruelty. Baron Barrett's face contorted with rage. Then you'll die with him. He raised his rifle. Several things happened at once. Kieran shoved Winifred down behind the boulder. A shot rang out, and one of the Baron's companions suddenly pitched forward off his horse, crying out in pain. That was a warning shot, came a new voice from behind them. The next one won't be. Winifred and Kieran turned to see a group of riders approaching from the west, at least a dozen men on horseback, led by a man in a marshal's uniform. Marshal Jenkins. Kieran breathed in relief. Right on time. You knew he was coming? Winifred asked in astonishment. I sent a message with a traveler we passed yesterday while you were resting, Kieran explained. I suspected your father might try something like this. Marshal Jenkins and his posse surrounded Baron Barrett and his remaining men, who reluctantly lowered their weapons. Baron Barrett, the marshal said sternly, I've got witnesses in town who saw you arguing with Jeremiah Dolan the night before you reported him murdered. Witnesses who heard you threaten to kill him if he backed out of the arrangement with your daughter. The Baron's face paled. That's preposterous. I would never save it for the judge, Jenkins interrupted. We found the murder weapon hidden in your stable, with your fingerprints all over it. He nodded to his deputies. Take them in. As the Baron and his men were disarmed and placed under arrest, Winifred sagged against Kieran, the tension draining from her body. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. It's over, he murmured. You're safe now. Marshal Jenkins approached them, tipping his hat to Winifred. Miss Barrett, I'm sorry about your father. Don't be, she replied quietly. He made his choices. The marshal turned to Kieran. Good to see you again, Lawson. Seems you have a knack for being in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on how you look at it, Kieran replied with a wry smile. Jenkins laughed. Well, we'll need both of you to come back to Cottonwood Springs to give your statements. After that, you're free to go wherever you please. As the marshal walked back to his posse, Winifred looked up at Kieran. You saved my life. You saved your own life, he corrected gently. You were brave enough to climb out that window. I just happened to be passing by. What happens now? She asked, suddenly uncertain. Her entire life had been the Barrett Ranch. Without it, without her father cruel as he was, she felt adrift. That depends, Kieran said, his eyes searching hers. Where do you want to go? I still have my cousin in Colorado, she said slowly. But, Winifred took a deep breath. But I've never had the freedom to choose my own path before. It's overwhelming. Kieran's expression softened. You don't have to decide everything right now. Why don't we start by heading to Cottonwood Springs, giving our statements, and then taking it one day at a time? She nodded, grateful for his understanding. That sounds perfect. The journey back to Cottonwood Springs was mercifully uneventful. Winifred rode alongside Kieran, watching as he occasionally exchanged words with Marshal Jenkins. There was an ease between the two men that spoke of a shared history. How do you know the Marshal? She asked during a brief rest stop. We served together during the war, Kieran explained. After, he took up the badge and I took to the trail. But we've kept in touch over the years. And what do you do, exactly? On the trail? Kieran smiled. A little of everything. I was a scout for the army for a while. Did some cattle driving. Occasionally, I do some work for marshals like Jenkins when they need an extra gun, or someone who knows the territory. You don't have a home? Winifred asked softly. Something flickered in his eyes, a brief shadow of loneliness, quickly hidden. Not the kind with four walls and a roof, no. When they arrived in Cottonwood Springs, the town was abuzz with the news of Baron Barrett's arrest. Winifred kept her head high as curious onlookers stared and whispered, though she was grateful for Kieran's steady presence beside her. At the marshal's office, they gave their statements about the events at the Barrett Ranch and the confrontation that followed. Marshal Jenkins assured them that with the evidence they had and the testimony of several witnesses, Baron Barrett would likely face a long prison sentence for Dolan's murder. What about the ranch? Winifred asked, surprised to find she cared about the answer. With your father in prison, it legally passes to you as his only heir, Jenkins explained. You could sell it, or keep it and hire someone to run it for you. The thought of owning the very place that had been her prison for so long was strange. I'll need time to think about it, she said finally. As they left the marshal's office, the setting sun cast long shadows across the main street of Cottonwood Springs. Winifred felt exhausted but lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I've taken a room at the hotel, Kieran told her. You should get some rest. It's been a long few days. Where will you go after this? She asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Kieran looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. I hadn't really thought about it. North, probably. There's work in Montana this time of year. Winifred nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course he would move on. Men like Kieran Lawson didn't stay in one place for long. And why should she expect anything different? They'd known each other barely 3 days. Yet in those 3 days, he'd shown her more kindness and respect than she'd experienced in years. He'd risked his life for her, a stranger. And somewhere along the dusty trails and starlit nights, she'd begun to feel something for him that she couldn't quite name. Well, she said, forcing a smile, I'm grateful for everything you've done. I hope your journey north is safe. She turned to go, but his hand caught hers, gentle but firm. Winifred, he said softly, and the sound of her name on his lips made her heart skip. I said I hadn't thought about it, but maybe I should. She looked back at him, afraid to hope. What do you mean? Kieran stepped closer, still holding her hand. I've been on the move since the war ended. 10 years of drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself it was freedom, but lately... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Lately I've been wondering if I've just been running from the possibility of loss. Winifred's breath caught. And now I'm thinking that some things might be worth the risk. His eyes, warm and earnest, held hers. I don't have much to offer. No fine house or ranch, no fortune. Just myself, for what that's worth. It's worth everything, Winifred whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Kieran's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. I know we've only just met, and I'm not asking for promises. Just
time.
Time to see if what I'm feeling is real, if what I think I see in your eyes when you look at me is real. It's real, she assured him, her heart pounding. At least for me, it's real. His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and Winifred answered by stepping closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. So, Miss Barrett, he said softly, what would you say to having a traveling companion on your journey to Colorado? And perhaps beyond, if that's where the trail leads us. Winifred smiled, feeling for the first time in her life that the future was full of possibility rather than dread. I'd say that sounds like the beginning of a grand adventure, Mr. Lawson. 2 years later, Winifred stood on the porch of a modest but comfortable cabin nestled in the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. The Barrett Ranch had been sold, the proceeds allowing her and Kieran to purchase this small piece of heaven, a horse breeding operation that was already gaining a reputation for quality stock. Inside, she could hear Kieran singing softly to their 3-month-old daughter, Emma, his deep voice gentle as he rocked her to sleep. The sound filled Winifred with a contentment she had never dared to imagine possible. Life wasn't perfect. There were hard days when the work seemed endless, when winter storms howled down from the mountains, when they disagreed about the best way to handle a difficult customer or a sick horse. But those challenges only seemed to strengthen the bond between them. Kieran stepped out onto the porch, carefully cradling Emma against his chest. "She's finally asleep," he whispered, coming to stand beside Winifred. "You have the magic touch." Winifred smiled, leaning against his side and looking up at the star-filled sky. "I was just thinking about the night we met." Kieran's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Best night of my life, even with all the danger and gunfire." "Really? Better than our wedding day? Better than when Emma was born?" He laughed softly. "Different kind of best. That night was the beginning of everything good in my life." Winifred turned in his arms, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. "Do you ever miss the trail? The freedom of not being tied down to one place." Kieran's eyes, warm and sincere, met hers. "Not for a single moment. Everything I was searching for, I found right here." His hand gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "With you." As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, Winifred Barrett Lawson silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought this man riding into her life on that desperate night 2 years ago. From the ashes of cruelty and fear had risen something beautiful, a love that grew stronger with each passing day, a family built on respect and tenderness, and a future limited only by the boundaries of their dreams. "I love you, Kieran Lawson," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I love you, Winnie," he murmured against her lips. "More than all the stars in the sky." Behind them, their cabin glowed with warmth and light, a beacon in the wilderness. And in Kieran's arms, Winifred finally understood what it meant to be truly home.